St Thomas Head has a history involving the British military, which started during the First World War and continued well into the 21st century. The site is some 3.5 kilometres from the village of Cewstoke. I first became interested in the area when I walked along Sand Point during stage 3 of my Samarathon in July. St Thomas Head is best approached from the National Trust's Priory car park. The first view is that of Woodspring Priory. This was established in the 13th century by William de Courtenay. The current church was built in the 15th century, but the prior was dissolved by Henry VIII in 1536. As the drone rotates to the left, we can see Worldbury Hill and then the Mendip Hills. As the coastline comes into view, the River Banwell snakes through the landscape. Beyond the small lake is St Thomas Head. As a military site, it has two distinct benefits: its remoteness, thus avoiding prying eyes, and the very large tidal range. This view shows the site as it was in 2009. Just visible is its security fence and the entrance gate. Walking around the security fence, several of these markers are evident. Military sites are normally identified with markers bearing the broad arrow, so these are currently a mystery. Nowadays there's perhaps little to suggest the past. All buildings were demolished in 2017 after they'd become vandalised. Recent history of St Thomas Head really starts during the First World War. Trial trenches were dug here. Quite what the trial involved is unclear, but the location assured privacy. The purpose of this site during World War II is better explained. In 1941, the site was closed to the public and designated for weapons testing by the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development under the control of HMS Birnbeck. Superimposing the locations of the World War II buildings and pier shows the location of the control and communications room, observation posts and ancillary buildings needed to run and direct the range operations. It would seem that there is a first-hand account of targets being strafed by Gloucester Gladiator aircraft. Just like Brean Down, there had once been a concrete directional arrow confirming the use as a bombing range. In May and June 1944, two ships were intentionally scuttled in Woodspring Bay. The closest, the SS Fernwood, had been damaged by enemy bombing off Dartmouth in 1942. The furthest is HMS Staghound, which had been similarly damaged off Torquay. They were sunk in order to develop techniques for the rapid destruction of concrete-filled enemy block ships. The timing might be significant given that the D-Day landing started on the 6th of June. The two wrecks were even more visible during stage 4 of my Samarathon, when I walked along Woodspring Bay and when the tide was almost at its lowest. It remains unclear whether the two ships were used as bombing targets. There are, however, at least 22 bomb craters visible as circular holes in the mudflats and adjacent to the wrecks. This image shows the site as it was in 2009. In 1948, the site was turned over from the Admiralty to the RAF. But in 1955, it was being used to trial anti-submarine and mine warfare and operated by the Admiralty Underwater Warfare Establishment. It was also assigned to the disposal of munitions. Many of the buildings seen here were built in the 1970s, although the magazine building was rather later. The site then came under the control of the Defence Evaluation Research Establishment. Finally, in 2001, it was taken over by Kinetic for explosive and shock testing. The disposal of munitions also continued. In addition to permanent buildings, several portakabins are apparent. This image shows St Thomas Head as it is today and explored by me on foot and by drone. The method used to dispose of munitions was to stake them on the mud at low tide and then detonate them once covered. In 2002, the site lost its anonymity when a pallet of 21 Swingfire anti-tank missiles was swept away by the rising tide. Local MP Liddell Granger raised the matter in the House of Commons. In 2004, he produced missile parts which he had found near the Hinkley Point nuclear power station. Experts doubted that these were the Swingfires. 3 years later, though, the licence for explosives disposal was lost, and thus the site was abandoned in 2008. The pier was built in 1970 and extended about 25 metres over the River Banwell. Like other buildings on the site, the pier was demolished in 2017 and the material removed. Having first viewed the location of the former pier, attention turns to that of the magazine building. The magazine building was built between 1979 and 1985. Its planning application described it as being for the manufacture of explosives. It was more likely to be for the storage and assembly of explosive devices, though. It is recognisably set into the hill to limit the effect of any accident. The design of the building included a frangible roof to encourage any explosion to be vertical. Flying towards the magazine, immediately ahead is a large hard stand, which would have allowed the manoeuvring of vehicles and perhaps the positioning of shipping containers. To the right are the building foundations. The magazine building was enclosed with its own security fence, and the boundary is still just discernible. From this vantage point, the next location, the foundations of the boathouse and the vehicle workshop, are visible. The vehicle maintenance building and the boathouse were both of Nissen hut construction. Nissen buildings were first developed by Major Peter Norman Nissen in the early years of the First World War. Looking down on the two foundations, the location of the slipway can also be appreciated. Turning around, below are the foundations of the Observation and Instruments building. This would seem to have been the very heart of the operation, and from where underwater detonation would be instigated and where instruments would have recorded the results. This photo was taken in 2016 after an external staircase which linked the concrete stairs to the upper floor of the building had been removed. A series of cables extended from this building down to the foreshore structures. From the land, a series of pillars once supported cable trays leading out to the foreshore structures. Much of the cable trays and the tip pillars have been removed. Further down the beach, however, the trays have survived. The cable trays are substantial steel sections with clamping bars. together designed to protect the cables from any damage from waves. This photo, taken on another occasion and when the tide was further out, shows the cable trays and the foreshore structures. How they were used remains one of the mysteries of this site. The site, having been abandoned by the ministry in 2008, slowly decayed. In 2015, a large collection of pictures was published on Flickr showing that the site had been trespassed and that the buildings extensively vandalised. But by then the porta cabins had been removed. In 2016, Wessex Archaeology were commissioned to prepare a building assessment and photographic survey in preparation for a planning application to demolish the remaining buildings. I am indebted to Wessex Archaeology, who gave permission for me to use some of their images for which they hold copyright. In the notes I have provided details of some of the sources used in the preparation of this video. From the beginning, St Thomas Head intrigued me. Especially at dawn, I found the site to be truly atmospheric, to walk amongst the remains of the buildings and to imagine their former roles. It is genuinely a place of isolation, with only the sounds of the wind, the waves, the bird life and the sheep. I will certainly return.